Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex or Nuzz here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the recent release news of the new Elite Dungeon that's coming this summer to Runescape 3, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about, is this Elite Dungeon really the right move for this boss in this update, and does it make sense for the game? If you enjoy videos like this, make sure to subscribe because almost 70% of you aren't subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like, and thank you all for 27,000 subscribers. So let's get into this. So if you didn't see, last week Jagex announced that there would be a new Elite Dungeon and boss battle coming in the summer of 2022, with the final boss being Zamorak. Now this sparked a good bit of discussion and debate. I saw two things mainly on social media. One side was the person who said, yes, I love all Elite Dungeons and I'm super excited for this new update and I'm glad we're getting another Elite Dungeon. It sounds awesome. Then on the other side of the coin, there were people saying, I'm excited that we have a new boss, but did it really need to be another Elite Dungeon? And that debate is kind of what we're going to talk about today. But not just that, we're going to talk about how the Elite Dungeon could be new and different compared to Elite Dungeons of the past. So while we don't have all the information yet, what we do know is that this will have a new tier 95 reward, and the boss in the Elite Dungeon will be Zamorak, which is a really cool theme, and we can assume it could be similar to previous Elite Dungeons, as in you face two bosses leading up to the final boss being Zamorak. Or they could go a different route where you're fighting mobs all the way to the end, where you'll then face Zamorak. This is yet to be seen, and I'm sure it will come out in later details, but Jagex did say it could be the hardest boss that they've ever made. Now this is a huge statement when you consider things like 4K Telos, 4K Archglacier, and other very challenging bosses in RuneScape today. But with such a difficult boss coming into the game, is an Elite Dungeon really the best way to present it to its full potential? So I always wonder about what the public perception is about things in RuneScape 3. That's why I run a lot of polls on my channel, because I'm just curious to what you guys think about things. And with the Elite Dungeon, I wasn't sure if it was something that is very well liked among the community, but many of you actually do really like Elite Dungeons in general, and I do too. The number actually surprised me though. RuneScape tends to kind of be split on a lot of updates and issues, but 5 months ago I was just interested, so I randomly ran a poll about Elite Dungeons just to get your perception on them, and after about 7,000 votes, 68% of you said you like Elite Dungeons, while 32% of you said you prefer traditional style bosses. I found this really interesting, as I thought Elite Dungeons would get a little more hate than they did, but it seems like a lot of you, including me, really enjoy them. So while this is releasing as an Elite Dungeon and they are fairly popular, what could the alternatives have been? Well, Jagex could have said they are releasing Zamorak as a standalone boss, which I think would have also been okay, seeing as they are touting it as one of the most difficult bosses ever made. Usually those bosses have been bosses with enrage mechanics, and also standalone bosses like Telos or Archglacier, not Elite Dungeons. So let's take a look at the pros and cons of Elite Dungeons in general. So I mean, the pros are you get more content. Usually Elite Dungeons just feel bigger than what's going for a typical boss fight. Usually there is more content with it. You know, there's lore with it. The areas look expansive and beautiful. You have Easter eggs, things like pages of lore thrown about, little mini bosses that can sometimes drop you cool things like Swordy McSwordface in ED3, for example. I mean, you can even find things like the mysterious chicken in the Dragonkin Laboratory, which is also an Easter egg obtained as a drop for using the mysterious perk. There's all kinds of things in Elite Dungeons, and all of these things make Elite Dungeons just feel like a big epic adventure, something that I feel, as I've said before, that raids should have been. But like everything, there are drawbacks, and Elite Dungeons is not without them. The cons, of course, come when you realize that every time you want to go and get KC on the boss, or, you know, practice and get better, you have to go through a huge dungeon of other less engaging bosses and mobs. This, of course, does get sped up as time goes on, as now people can do Elite Dungeons super fast at, like, some people a rate of 4 or 5 solos per hour, which of course is not something everyone can do, including myself. The average player, it's going to take you much longer to solo Elite Dungeons, but this is a drawback, as your first 5 or 10 runs might be super fun, but as I learned doing Zuck, after you start farming the boss, you kind of just wish you could skip straight to the boss without having to do all the repetitive dungeon over and over again. Now, if they find a way to make the dungeon less repetitive, which is something that I think might be a little bit difficult. I know, some games like rogue-like games have kind of like a generated world or randomly generated dungeons, so it's different every time. I'm not sure if that's something that Jagex can do. I mean, they kind of did it with dungeoneering, but for one boss, I feel like it might be too hard of a task. If they could do that, that would be insanely good, but I'm not sure if that's something that's on the table that they're looking to do. But if they can find some way to possibly make the dungeon a little less repetitive, so when you do go through the dungeon, it's not the exact same thing every time. Now, I know some people actually might like that because it gives them a chance to fine-tune their runs and basically get to the point where they can do runs extremely fast. So some of you might actually like it where it's the same thing every time. Let me know below, would you prefer the elite dungeon to kind of be randomized a bit so it was a little different every time so maybe you don't get as bored, or would you prefer it to be the same every time so you can kind of fine-tune your runs? I think something that Jagex should consider for this elite dungeon that makes all elite dungeons feel, much more engaging is when all the bosses feel relevant and worthwhile to kill. So for example, in Elite Dungeon 1, there are 3 bosses, but only one of these bosses, Siryu, drops anything really notable or worth your time. Of course, you have the Masuda War Spear, but that's not really worth too much. In the Shadow Reef, there are also 3 bosses, but again, only one, the Ambassador, at the end drops anything notable. But in Elite Dungeon 2, the Dragonkin Laboratory, you can get mutated codexes from every single boss, which even if you find it a bit repetitive to do, you at least still know you can get some really big drops from the earlier bosses as well, which is something I really like because it makes it so you're not like bored for the first, 80% of the dungeon and then you're only excited for when you kill that last boss for a drop. It kind of gives you a little dosage of a potential drop, potential fun throughout the dungeon with each boss you kill, and it makes it feel much more balanced. And it's something that I really like, and Jagex should definitely think about incorporating that if they go with the standard 3-boss Elite Dungeon format. Now, although I know you guys like Elite Dungeons based on that poll, I did however wonder, once Jagex comes out with this Elite Dungeon, should it be the same as the Elite Dungeons of the past? Well, I decided to ask you guys what you think in a poll. I asked you, should the new Elite Dungeon be like all the other Elite Dungeons or totally different? Now, around 20% of you said it should be like the other Elite Dungeons, as in having 3 bosses. A little bit lower percentage said it should only be mobs and then have a final boss at the end. And then most of you, around 60% or more of you, think that the new Elite Dungeon should be something totally different and new. Now, personally, I totally agree with the majority here. I think you can take the framework of a normal Elite Dungeon and kind of ramp it up and add more elements to make it feel more engaging. Of course, the thing with all the bosses needing to feel relevant, as we know, this is going to be a pretty big boss. Zamrock is going to be huge, a very challenging boss, one of the most, if not the most difficult in RuneScape. So this feels like a pretty, big project they're taking on here. An Elite Dungeon feels like it should feel a bit bigger than the other Elite Dungeons, so I think they can add in more stuff to make it more engaging. So I think there's a lot of stuff they can add to make this Elite Dungeon absolutely great. I always said we need something like the Theater of Blood or the Chambers of Zarek from old school RuneScape in RuneScape 3. That is something that I feel like RuneScape 3 has lacked. Of course, we have Elite Dungeons, but those raids in old school RuneScape just feel a bit ramped up compared to the Elite Dungeons RuneScape 3. They feel like they just have a bit more to them that make them exciting and feel like a huge accomplishment when you complete them. So if this new Elite Dungeon could feel bigger and more exciting than our, normal Elite Dungeons and feel more something like a Raids 2, I guess, I feel like that would be the best case scenario and something that I really hope happens. So the question, is this the right move? Should Jagex release this boss as a Elite Dungeon, or should they have gone with the standalone boss? I personally feel like if they do this right and they create something, engaging that is, feels like a massive deal. I remember when Elite Dungeon 1 came out, it felt massive. It felt like a huge deal. And I feel like if they can create that hype around it and make it feel like a huge deal, sort of like Theater of Blood and Chambers of Xeric feel in old school, I feel like it can definitely be a huge success. And I kind of like that they're doing something a bit different. If they, you know, succeed in making this feel like a sort of bigger Elite Dungeon, a huge deal, I think this can be really, really amazing. I even saw some people saying that they think maybe instead of the 3 boss format, maybe they go to an even more boss format, you know, they have more bosses, because this is Zamrock. This is supposed to feel like a really big deal, so I think it will be really exciting to see what Jagex does, and I'll definitely be covering it here on the channel as well. So I'd love to know all your thoughts below. Make sure to leave a comment and tell me what you think. Do you agree with what I said in this video, what, you know, the majority of people said in these polls? I'd love to know your thoughts, if you think things should be changed around and stuff like that. But as always, thank you all for watching the video. Thank you all for getting me 27K subscribers. That's, you know, mind-blowing, so thank you guys so much. And yeah, I'm about to be done graduating college, so a lot more videos to come, and I will see you all in the next video. Some exciting things to come.